Welcome to Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans.
This is Lisa Pesnicek.
And I'm Sarah Beckner, and we're here to deep dive into the fascinating world of astrology.
We offer blind chart readings, interviews with notable guests, and much more.
So keep listening as we bring you Insight for Humans. Hello and welcome. We are so excited to have Karen Crawford with us today, physician and astrologer. We're bringing her into a discussion about medical astrology today, which I think for the non-astrologer, people aren't aware of this as one of the astrological tools is looking at people's physical health and well-being. And I think it's fascinating given where astrology sits in the current social context as this taboo and fringe thing. And really looking back at some of the history of medical astrology and realizing what an integral piece of medical practice it has been through the ancient Mesopotamia into ancient Greece, and as recently as looking at astrologers like William Lilly in the 17th century in England who did medical astrology. So we have a long history of using astrology as a means to look at the human body's relationship to the cosmos, and looking at a birth chart to explore something about one's constitution and understand their personality and how that factors into illnesses that they might experience throughout the course of their life. So, astrology can be used to predict health problems. It can be used to predict the best times for treatments or look at sort of the bookends of when we're experiencing something, what that might look like. There are some people who match herbs and remedies to planetary influences. And there's certainly electional astrology where we can try to time treatments and surgical interventions for the most fortuitous periods. So we're just going to dive in with Karen. Karen, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us something about your professional history, your astrology practice, and how you use medical astrology. And then we can just dive into the art of medical astrology and maybe share a little bit about specific planetary pictures that might tell us something about someone's constitution or things they might grapple with. And yeah, so we should have some fun today. I'll let you take it away, Karen.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me on. I'm super excited to be with you today. In my professional history, I was straight through college into medical school. I did my residency in emergency medicine because while I was in college, I got my EMT basic. So I was scooping up drunk kids and taking them to the hospital. This is basically my first contact with medicine in that sense. And I also worked in an emergency department during medical school. So it kind of drew my attention. And what I liked about it was I was never bored. You never knew what's going to come through the doors. You had to be on your feet. And I liked procedures. I like babies. I like old people. So it's just perfect. And everybody said, "Oh, but you're going to burn out." And I'm like, well, hopefully it won't be for a while. Right. And then COVID happened. I was already starting to get a little crunchy, and COVID made me crispy. And so in June of 2022, I worked my last shift. I think I watched one episode of The Pit and I couldn't watch anymore. It's too realistic. So St. Dennis, Nurse Jackie, some of these other shows are kind of funny. I can tolerate them. But I really went into medicine to help be a part of the healing of patients. And I feel like, and obviously emergency medicine, you're saving people's lives, but the healing part, maybe I would have been better off in primary care or something like that. I'm not sure. But what I learned from emergency medicine is you really cannot judge a book by its cover. You need to examine your patients, talk to your patients, listen to your patients, trust the patients in a lot of different ways. And I think people fall through the cracks because I don't know that people have, from a physician standpoint, time, because you've got a computer, you got to see 15 people, you got to, 15 minutes with each person. So it's very difficult. But one of the things I think really helped me was to sort of size people up, because you have to know if they're sick or not sick in the emergency department. But also, people don't always know what's wrong with them, And I think moving into astrology, my sister got me a reading when I turned 40. And I'm like, everybody knows the newspaper things, you look up your stuff, whatever, but I wasn't really ever that impressed with it. And plus, I was Catholic. So, the whole stigma of astrology, right? But then I had this reading and he was an evolutionary astrologer. I'm like, holy cow, how does he know this stuff about me? This isn't insane. And I just was so curious. So I think my number one thing of my own personality is I'm wildly curious about everything. I read books all the time. I'm taking classes all the time. It's just fascinating to me. And so once I had the reading, it really sparked a question mark in my head. Like, how can this work? Right. And I'm one of those people, I don't necessarily have to dissect it down to the minute functioning to respect that it works. So I really do trust that astrology works. And so that brought me, I started studying modern astrology. And then I went to the Norwalk conference in 2022, I think it was. And I took my first medical astrology with Michael Bryan. And then I started studying medical astrology. Initially, I was resisting medical astrology because I'm like, it's too obvious. I don't want to do that. It's for like, you should do it. What do you think? And I can understand that now, but I really feel like I needed time to develop who I was as an astrologer, get the background. So learning traditional astrology was very interesting. So I was taking evolutionary astrology through the FCEA with Stephen Forrest. And I was 2/3 through that program, but that's when I started taking the medical astrology. And it was too much to take. I was already doing the professional certification in medical astrology, so I couldn't do the FCEA too. So something had to give. So I decided to invest more in the medical astrology. And so how has that influenced my practice? I have context. I have context to what people are going through. There's probably a couple of things I don't know a lot about just because emergency medicine, you have to know a lot about many things, but I'm not an expert unless you need an intubation or I need to treat a stroke or a heart attack. I know how to do those things very well. And you see a lot of random things in the emergency department, let me tell you. So I think the context idea of understanding different things that can happen to our bodies and then learning about it from the astrological point of view is just fascinating to me because there's only what, 7 planets, and then we have the classical planets, we have the three modern planets. And just to use these tiny little tools to describe all the possible things that can happen, it's quite interesting. And just really quickly, I think your point, Sarah, about how astrology was such a part of caring for people in medicine. My mother-in-law was in Cambridge for 10 months studying there. And we went out to visit them in the fall, last fall. And they happened to have this amazing exhibit of medical astrology in that time period.
No way.
I took videos, I took pictures of all these books. I mean, you couldn't smell the books because they were enclosed. I was like, and it was so cool because they had this whole diagram, this whole wheel of like you used to be like the piss prophets when you were so sick you couldn't get out of bed and they
Yeah.
they had all the different urine colors and like what it could be and stuff like that. So it
No
was just
way.
to connect to the richness of that history. I think a part of it's the Industrial Revolution is the church not wanting people to have information, like all these different things, whatever it was, all these things just lost, taking the power away from the women, not letting them birth. More men became OBGYNs that they took over midwifery and that kind of stuff. So anyway, it was really, really amazing. So I think if you're interested in studying medical astrology, it's important to recognize that it is something that we're standing on the shoulders of. But modern medicine is amazing too. Like I'm deaf and I have cochlear implants. My husband has a pacemaker. I'm like, get to the emergency department if you're having a stroke, peeps. There's real concrete things that medicine is amazing for. But if you want to know what's my predisposition to different things, what can you see as highlights in my chart, I think medical astrology is amazing. So
Incredible. As we were putting this together, it's funny, I was thinking about how ancient medical astrology is and how doctors hundreds of years ago either worked with an astrologer or were required to know some level of astrology. And just like you were saying with the urine sample colors, is there was a certain chart called the decumbrature chart that was cast for the moment that the astrologer received the urine sample. And then they would cast a chart at that moment, and then that would give the astrologer an idea of what the illness of this person looked like, the duration, the nature, all of those things. And so it was a really important tool. And also, it wasn't until more recent times that we started to have really more accurate natal charts. So that's why we needed charts such as these. We still use them as astrologers, medical astrologers, and also just a regular astrologer. But also, medical astrology is really part of regular astrology because it's about the constitution of an individual and how you look at a chart. And so we can see relationships in a natal chart, we can see early environmental conditions, we can see the children, we can see the friends, we can see the career, but we can also really more fundamentally see how healthy is this person? Do they have a weakened constitution? Do they have problems with their kidneys? Is it with their reproductive system? And we can get really strong signatures that are in the chart. And I think it can be very helpful for people just to know that they're not making it up, that that's not some random thing that happened in their life. And I think more importantly, we can contextualize that within their life in general. Like, so you struggle with health, so relationships can be a little bit more difficult because you're not always able to be as available within the relationship in certain ways. There's these ways where chronic health conditions or any health conditions can impact other areas of the person's life, like their work and children and all of these different things. So, kind of a tangent. I loved your story, Karen. I haven't heard the whole thing from start to finish. So, thank you for that. And Karen and I are in Michael Bryan's medical astrology course, and we've been in that together for several years now. Just us in a small little cohort learning medical astrology. So, yeah, thank you for that.
As you discuss, Lisa, just putting the medical in the context of someone's overall life, I guess the way we're talking about the medical astrology really is more traditional astrology, where we're looking at concrete manifestations of things we see in the chart. But I have
Mhm.
to say, in my journey, I'm an acupuncturist. And so I study East Asian medicine, and I started pulling in astrology almost for a more modern astrology in the sense that I wanted to be able to have more soulful conversations with my patients. Because I
Mm,
think the chart allows us to look at that intersection between body and soul. And a lot of pathology, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. We humans have to do a lot of meaning making around what happens to us when we're dealing with chronic illness or sudden life events or acute things that happen. And so I feel like the astrology is a great tool for looking at that intersection, helping a person navigate their health and well-being from this broader viewpoint. Like you said, Lisa, looking at it in the context of one's overall life, and even in a modern astrology context of life lessons. If you think about evolutionary astrology and what are the developmental pressures in a human life, and some of those definitely will show up in the realm of addressing illness, dealing with symptoms in our bodies.
mm. Yeah. So, Karen, I wanted to ask, what does your client work look like? If somebody comes to you for a medical astrology consultation, what does that look like on your end? What are you focusing on? What are you able to offer your clients in that space? Because I think that's something that some people might not be able to really wrap their heads around. They're like, well, how can these planets tell me what my health looks like and that sort of thing?
So, as we are Michael Bryan students, we have our rubric where we start off by looking at the soul and psyche first and foremost, because you need to understand, okay, who is this person? What's their basic story? How are they living their life? And we can also look at the planet that represents this person. Now, it's more effective if that planet is receiving a lot of aspects. So, in astrology, this type of astrology, we look at the hard aspects, like Sarah mentioned, because we know hard aspects make things happen, concrete events. We like tight orbs, hard aspects. So the first thing is understanding who this person is. And that's what we'll look at the first part of the reading. And then the second part, we look at the general constitution. So what are the things when you were talking about, Lisa, like how healthy someone is, we can see what are the markers that are really showing that this person is really robust and they're very vital. But on the other hand, maybe they have some things they have to work through with energy levels. Maybe they need 3 cups of coffee to get going in the morning. And then the third part of it is what we call morbificant combinations. And it's a sense planetary pairs when we see them through different relationships, through aspects or the declination table, different ways we look at these hard aspects. And then we know what these planets universally mean. And so we get a feel for areas where there might be something happening. This is where the X marks the spot, things that are drawing our attention. And then the fourth part of it is also relating what you were talking about, the context, like how's this going to show up in their life? Sometimes I'm looking at a chart and I'm like, dang, like this is going to be really interesting with the GI perspective, right? Let's say their moon's heavily afflicted and you start talking to the person and you're just not seeing all these different things you thought you would see, but maybe they have a really difficult relationship with their mom, or maybe they have a hard time letting go of things emotionally, or all these different things. You can see the way these things express themselves. So when I sit with somebody, I see all the hard aspects and I see, okay, what is really speaking to me the most? And then I organize it by system in a sense, because I think people can follow it better when I'm talking about your gut and I talk about all the things in your gut. And
Mhm.
that's what I'm doing at this point to make it easier on my clients. Because if you don't have an astrologer as a client, this is the same way I felt when I was in the emergency department is I need to explain this in English. Like
Mhm.
I talk 100% English to these people because the worst part is when I see a client, oh, I've had readings before. And they're like, I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember nothing. I think I had some trying something. I don't even know. The person's so confused. So then I like to show the chart too, because a lot of people are visual and astrology is such a visual thing. So I always share my screen and I go through it and then sometimes I'll even write up a quick little summary of these are the things I noticed. But it depends on when you're reading for somebody. I prefer 30 and older. Um,
Mhm.
but I've read for people in their 50s and 60s, and those are the readings I tend to nail because it's like, oh, yeah. Oh, that, yeah, interesting. So you never want to, we're never putting something into the sphere of whatever, like this is going to happen to you because we're reading for what we know. And sometimes these things, like we said, express different ways. So we're never predicting this is going to happen to anybody when we look at these combinations. But why is your chart saying this thing? And is it saying in a couple of different ways? Well, that's going to make an astrologer pay attention and say something to the client.
Mhm. Yeah. And do you feel like you're able to give advice as far as different areas to focus on? Say that they have multiple different things. Maybe you can say, well, maybe get this sort of test or find somebody to do this. You're in a unique position where you're actually a doctor, which
Yes.
is very rare for astrologers. But is that something that you feel like you're often able to guide people with, is to give them maybe more of an idea of potentially where to give a little bit more focus?
For me, I always say, first of all, I'm not your doctor and medical advice. However, you might want to ask your doctor about this. So, for
Yeah.
example, I had a woman who she was talking about something with her heart and her lipids or whatever. And they were thinking about putting her on a statin right away. And I don't know. My personal feeling about statins are cardiologists want them in the water. They want everybody on a statin, even when they're 12. But I personally feel like there's a lot a diet can do to help with your lipid profiles, depending if you have something hereditary with your cholesterol or whatever. I mean, sometimes there's just genetics and it's hard to fight genetics. But I talked with her and I said, one of the things you could potentially ask them is if you get a calcium scoring on your chest, because we know that when you have inflammation of those vessels, the white blood cells and the lipids make a plaque. And so those can get calcified over time. So if you have a really high calcium channel score, and let's say you're overweight or you have diabetes or you're a smoker or there's other things going along with it, I'd be like, so what are you going to take for the statins? She wasn't a complete vegetarian, but she's pretty healthy. And she does other things that were just saying to me, let's just slow things down. Let's take a look and see what her overall risk factor is. Because the whole thing about disease is what's your risk factor? How quickly do we need to jump on this? What are the different things we can approach this? And so she ended up getting the scoring system and it was really, really low. And she did a couple tweaks to her diet and she was able to not have to take anything, which I'm like, great, because I think medicines are incredibly effective when we need them. But
Mhm.
after being in the emergency department, I'm kind of like, well, what can we do without having any sort of side effects or troubles on your own? And so that's where I think nutritionists are amazing. And then there's energy medicine stuff too, right? There's things that we can
Mhm.
do just to help our psychological, emotional well being that can also,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Send him to Sarah.
Yes, acupuncture.
I was thinking as you were talking, I was thinking I have a client who has Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn in the first. So, Saturn in the first, just from a generic, simple astrology perspective, we know that there's some learning and some challenges just around tending to the physical body. And she struggles with obesity. And there is that same thing when you see a chart with a lot of heat in it. or something, when you see these really strong signatures and you think, "Oh my gosh, this person has some work cut out for them to fight against these." It's almost like a looking at genetic material, you know? It's almost like being like, "Yeah, you have this propensity for this. This
Right.
runs through your story.
Right.
Let the work begin," because it's gonna take some effort to get the chart to show up in a different way.
Mm,
And I
absolutely.
love that you're saying that because one of the things that Michael had talked about is we have these grooves in our chart. If we do nothing, we have no change in our consciousness this entire lifetime, our chart's going to play itself out over and over and over. And that momentum is pushing the wheel in that rut, right?
Mhm.
I work with a lot of spiritual people in my practice. And when you can say something like, oh, this is a pattern, this is not in my best interest. And then you make that choice to do something different for yourself. I think that's the ultimate act of self love. And I also feel like that's what we're here for, to get even more and more conscious and just more connected to the fact that we can change, we can do these things. So I'm a very optimistic person. But I feel like that's what a good astrologer does is they're like, hey, like, yeah, this really, and you can work with that idea of what are the things that I can do consciously to make this a little bit different. Because I believe we have these stories for a reason. Stephen Forrest would talk about how you make this thing happen, you pick these different things out, and then you walk to the edge of the diving board, and then you just say, good luck. And they push you off the diving board to go down. So it's kind of like that idea on some level, had an idea of what we might be experiencing in this lifetime.
Mhm.
And so the more that we can step into it and say, okay, I really wanted to learn for this patient, like how to really care for my body and listen to myself. And how do I feel when I eat this? How do I feel when I move? How do I respond to my relationships? What are these different things? Right. So yeah, that's my thought.
And I think optimism is an incredible trait for a healer because you're able to see the whole healthy pattern so that they can see it too. And I think you were saying, I think before we started recording, when you were talking, Karen, you were talking about it as a tool for validation. But there is something about looking at the astrology chart that depersonalizes it in a certain way that I think can be really helpful. Okay, you came in with some propensities this way. You don't have to layer on a bunch of story. It doesn't have to be a personal failure. It's part of, you've got Saturn in the first. We know that you came in to have a learning experience through challenges within the body and gaining some mastery over that. So, yeah.
Beautiful. So, do we want to start to go through the planets? So this is something that we decided we would do before we started recording, is to briefly go through the planets and illustrate pretty quickly what sorts of health conditions they can express with different combinations. This can get very detailed, and there's a lot that we're going to leave out. And also, just a huge caveat saying that these don't always express in a health condition sort of way. There's a whole bunch of other ranges of expression. This is not a prescriptive outline that we're going through. If you look at your birth chart and you're like, oh, yeah, I have Moon Neptune and I am allergic to most foods, kind of a confirmation, a validation of something that's happening for you. But there's always a bunch of other ways that can manifest. If you have Moon Neptune, you're not just going to wake up tomorrow and not be able to eat anything. So just putting that out there, because with all astrology, we don't want to cause any anxiety or mind swirling or anything like that. So yeah, do we want to start off with the moon? Okay.
Yeah.
Karen, do you want to?
Probably bears worth repeating that when we talk about Moon Neptune or any of these planetary combinations, we're talking about them in any hard aspect.
Yes.
Conjunction, square, opposition, even via declination, we're looking at challenging aspects.
Thank you,
In,
Sarah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If people are curious, this is Michael's book, The New Western Medical Astrology, and he has an appendix at the end that has all the combinations. So if you're curious about it, there's that
And
is,
Karen, aren't you part of that publication? Oh yeah, there's a forward.
yeah, I wrote the
Right.
forward.
It's a great book though. It's one of the best medical astrology books been put out there so far. So if you're interested in medical astrology, it's a great one to check out. It is a huge book,
These are the books I like though, because
right?
there can always be more you can write potentially, but I feel like there's so many case studies in here, which I really like
I
about.
know.
So when you read this, you can see how he links the things together. And I think that's what's really hard for astrologers is, X plus Y equals Z. But how do I see the whole thing? How do I put things together? And so when you read some of these case histories, I think it can be really helpful to put it into context and see how you can approach it more.
Yeah, and they're all real people living in the world. Just
Yeah.
yeah. All right, the moon. Take us in there, Karen. What is the moon?
So the moon primarily represents the stomach and the digestive system, but we also know that the moon is a secondary significator of the uterus for women. And we know there's different levels of significations for things. It represents the woman's body, like a high leg, the significatrix of the woman's body. But essentially, and I'm not sure how many combinations we should go through with the moon, because literally there's so many with the
I
moon.
know. It's
Wow.
very complex.
But I'll go with the moon Neptune because this woman that I just did a reading with, she actually has allergic reactions to fillers in food. I was like, do you
Wow.
have food allergies? Are you just more sensitive gut? Like you need a quarter of an Advil? She's like, I've had allergic reactions to fillers. And I was like, and so one of those things that does for her is it helps her stick her voice, like, is there whatever in this? And I'm not going to take that because I don't want to harm my body. And
Mhm.
there's ways around these things, right? So it's definitely a more sensitive gut. And can you have things with like diarrhea and bloating and whatnot, things like that.
Yeah, I guess just one more combination for the moon that I find interesting is Moon Uranus. I've been doing a lot of work with mental health, and Moon Uranus is a really strong marker, especially if there's other things going on in the chart to point towards that. Because the moon can also be part of our mental faculty, particularly like our long term memory. But also, it is our gut, it is our early childhood environment, our relationship with our mother, but also just how we feel safe. So if we have this agitation of Uranus coming in and afflicting that moon, it can make us feel as though the world around us doesn't make sense. Like there's too many unpredictable factors happening around us. And that could actually be true, or it could be something that is just heightened in our perception of the world around us, which can lead towards things specifically like anxiety, is something that we see with that. And when compared with other factors, OCD can also play in with that as well.
Yeah, all manner of instability and irregularities in a lot of ways. So irregular menstrual cycles,
Yeah.
irregular bowel movements, irregular appetite.
Mhm. Yeah, it points towards finicky eaters because they never know how the food is gonna settle inside of them.
I think one of the caveats with the moon Uranus is it could be just that the finicky, more psychological, but if they have moon Pluto, moon Neptune, and moon Uranus, that fear is very warranted. Because
Yes.
there's something going on.
Yes, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I wonder if some of the remedy, the medicine, is not written into the planetary combination. So if you have Moon Neptune and you know that Neptune is creating that permeability or susceptibility, it's almost like a lack of barrier, then maybe the remedy would be thinking about barriers, whether that's protecting your skin barrier, or I think in the case of food allergies, the intestinal lining is made up largely of glutamine. And so you can supplement with glutamine potentially to build that barrier, to strengthen that barrier. And same with Uranus, it's bringing the irregularity. And so the medicine might be perhaps to establish as much routine and consistency as possible to eliminate some of those potential symptoms and pathologies. So
Yeah, that's
taking meals
brilliant.
at regular times, eating, sleeping at regular times.
Mhm.
Which
Yeah.
again might feel against the grain for the person in some ways, right? Because they're like,
Right.
I don't have time for that. I can't do that. What are you talking about? But that is just pick one thing and just start with eating root vegetables to ground yourself. Okay. And then maybe wearing the color red, or maybe starting a couple yoga moves, or you know what I mean? I think one of the things we can do as astrologers, and I love that because I think Michael talks about the planets, like the planetary mediation too. So if you're really Martian, bring in some Venus, there's different ways that these planets balance each other. But even within that combination, I totally agree that just being aware of it, I feel like that's so much part of it because people cannot realize, like, even though they love the pretzel, but they're probably gluten sensitive, but they don't really want to believe that they are. So they're still eating the pretzel because maybe this next time I'll be fine. But if you're a permeable person and you probably have gluten sensitivity or maybe celiac or whatever, then you need to choose something different, right?
Mhm.
If it's consistently bothering you, and then we start to do these medical tests or whatever, we really can confirm it or whatever. But even just to know it, okay, well, maybe I should choose something different, you know?
Well, and
Yeah.
that's something I didn't understand before studying medical astrology, but as an acupuncturist, I would often see people who have excess heat and inflammation in their system often like hot. They like spicy food. They like bitter coffee. They like alcohol. And you see it in these planetary combinations because if somebody has a strong Mars afflicting something, they're going to run hot, but they're also probably going to have a predilection for hot things because they're Martian.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's good. I think it's good to see those things, like Karen, how you're saying how you show that to your clients and point it out. There's something powerful, I think, about visually seeing it and validating that, yes, that's how I am. And instead of eating that pretzel again, like next time they reach for that pretzel, they'll think of that moon Neptune signature in their chart and be like, oh, I'm just making that worse. I'm creating more of a leaky gut situation or more irritation in the gut.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
It's that consciousness.
yeah. So, how about Mercury? What's
I
going on
love
with
Mercury.
Mercury?
Mercury Uranus, I love that one. I love those people in general because I just think they're so brilliant. I just love what they say. You're in a meeting and they come up with the coolest things. But definitely Mercury Uranus is potentially that you're bringing in the lightning. So Uranus is lightning. It's this higher voltage. I think Michael described it one time as like you have 120 voltage going through your house, but Uranus is maybe 20,000 volts. So these people get these huge discharges of energy. And I always think about Christopher Lloyd from Back to the Future. I wonder if he had that character had Mercury Uranus because his hair was like, phew, you know, and he's this creative genius. Because Mercury rules our mind, our brain, how we think, how we communicate, all these different things. And so oftentimes these people are just, if they're not talking, there's something going on in here and they're just super stimulated and they're connecting with the environment. And the information, the way they take in information, the way they process information, the way they share information is different. And I grew up in the 70s, 80s or whatever. And I'm not sure how many of us might have been diagnosed with ADHD or these different things. But I think the neurodivergent thing is so beautifully embraced a lot now because people recognize that maybe you have dyslexia and the classroom is not your favorite place. And there's ways we can teach you to learn things differently, right? And to honor people's creative ideas and their originality instead of making them all feel like they have to fit into this square peg, round hole thing, right?
Mhm.
So when I see those people, I give them extra love because I'm like, I'm so glad you're here. We need you. And it could be things like if Mercury's in Sagittarius. It's really sciatica. Like I would say that's a very high level combination for me to get with a client. Like, by the way, any hip trouble, sciatica, inflammation in the area, like, oh my gosh, let me talk about my sciatica. That's a really good one.
What's it usually afflicted by
Oh, Mercury and Sag with Uranus.
with Uranus? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That
You're
makes sense.
making me think about a lot of neurodivergent people do a lot of compensations to fit into our world, particularly in the school systems and whatever. And so I think there is a kind of brilliance that emerges because they have to find ways around and creative ways to allow themselves to be at work in these systems that really aren't natural for them. And so that might be some of the brilliance. Uranus, the flashes of insight, the creativity, the ingenious ways of doing things and solving problems. And a lot of that might just come from the pressure of not that your thinking is not that this modern life is not really sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day. listening to somebody lecture is not really a good fit for you. S
Yeah. I've been thinking about that lately as far as the group of cohort of people that was born between 1993 and 1995, where they have the Uranus Neptune conjunction in their charts. And it was really that cohort of kids that who are now coming into adulthood. And that was where the new, more nuanced way of looking at mental health came from. The neurodivergent and looking at new ways to educate people, and autism took on a much more nuanced way of looking at that as well. And it feels like there was something about that. And I've been doing a lot of work, like I said, in mental health, and have been getting so many people coming to me born during these years that have really tight alignments to this combination of planets. There's something about that. And I haven't actually done the specific research around that, but it was around that time the kids who grew up with social media and more access to all of these things that are said to have triggered more mental health problems, and also social anxiety, which Uranus Neptune is definitely a signature for social anxiety. And that there's something about that combination, especially since we're speaking to Mercury, where your mind is just working differently. It's both fast and also dissipated. It's seeing in between all of the different spaces, but it's doing that very quickly. So there's really this real genius signature to it, but a genius that nobody understands because there's no words for it. And there's something within that combination and those people who are now adults that they've largely redefined so much of that area of research and knowledge and understanding. And also just society in general. I think that the creative bursts that have come from these people as well has been really remarkable. So, I don't know, it's been a fun little side note.
That's interesting because I think it was the mid-90s when they started changing the diagnostic parameters for autism. So we know
Mm.
now that the autistic spectrum is everything from a nonverbal institutionalized person to whatever, Steve Jobs. So
Yeah.
we talk about Neptune, we broadened and opened up these whole fields and yeah, that has changed the landscape a lot too, and we've done it in a lot of different areas in terms of looking at how the mind functions. There's a lot more diagnostics available for different kinds of sensory processing disorder, looking at those things. I mean, when we were kids, that kind of testing and those services weren't really available.
Mm-mm.
Like Karen said about ADD, yeah, if you didn't fit in the box, maybe they'd be like ADD if you were a little hyper and try to medicate you. But it wasn't as generous of a lens in terms of looking at the ways our brains function in unique ways.
Yeah. And Mercury, similar to the moon, can also reference the gut health. And I think that along with these same kids, now adults, but it stimulated more allergic reactions. There were more peanut allergies in the classroom, which when I was a kid didn't exist. And people had to be really careful. And my kids still have to be careful about what they bring into the room because of all of these different allergies that kids have. And I think that that's another important part. And when we look at like the moon and Mercury, both together, but also within their own realms relating to one another, there's a huge comment about this and statement about the mind gut connection and how important that is. And I love that astrology states it so clearly. It's something that it's always known. And now the medical field's like, oh, yeah, there's a brain gut connection. And astrology is saying, yeah, I always knew that. But I love that bit. And also, I think it's so fascinating that that combination in the sky and people who had that tight connection that really started that wave of putting those things together. And Mercury connecting to that, I think, is really, from an astrological perspective, telling that story.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Karen?
Have you guys listened to the telepathy tapes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so season one was really focused on children slash early or young adults and having them be assisted with spelling. There was a care home not far from one of the emergency departments I worked in. And I just remember this one guy he just really stuck with me. He would just say one word, but there was so much context in that one word. I just thought there was so much more going on, but everybody just assumed there was nothing going on. And we have savants that can grab things out, because the second season of telepathy tapes is even more expansive, looking at all these different things that we just don't understand and explain it. But it just makes me think about when the native people saw the huge ships coming. They didn't even know what they were. They didn't even know what it was. It wasn't even something they could comprehend. So just even the idea that we can now understand consciousness or these different things in such different ways, and that it's growing into this because we are evolving as a species and we're having these different ways we can understand each other, which is just so amazing. So if we haven't listened, I think it's really interesting. It's fascinating. So throw that in there because I think there's probably some Mercury Uranus stuff in there too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a woman in Oregon who teaches children to do what's called blind reading. I'll send you the thing because it's similar to telepathy tapes. These are not neurodivergent children, but they start young, training extrasensory perception so that they can read without using their visual sense. And there's a documentary being made right now about it. They're starting to document these kids. So I do think, yeah, maybe that Uranus Neptune is bringing, as those kids come of age, it's bringing a lot of those kinds of things online.
Yeah.
So cool. All right. So why don't we quickly just kind of speak to Venus and Sun? Mercury just took us on all of these tangents, which is amazing. But Sarah, do you want to speak to Venus?
Venus, the glands, the skin, endocrine glands, the thyroid. Again, when we look at these combinations, we're really looking for um, morbificant combinations. So ways that these inner planets are afflicted by malefic planets, if you will. So if Venus is afflicted by something like Saturn, we're going to have more hypo function, decreased function, dryness. If we have the combination of Jupiter, Venus, then it's going to amplify the juiciness, the reproductive capacity, the fertility.
Could also potentially make you more overweight because Venus, Jupiter loves all of the sweet things and the things that have more fat and yumminess to them, the carbs. So,
Yeah. There could be even just, if I say laziness, there's a judgment on it, but there could
ah,
be a little bit more of just wanting to be comfortable,
yes.
there could be secondary health consequences as a result of that.
Yeah.
Not
Diabetes could be
pushing
part of
oneself.
that.
Yeah. A little
Mhm.
hedonistic, Venus,
Yeah.
Jupiter.
Yeah. And Karen, you've been doing work on hysterectomies. Do you want to share? Venus plays a big part in the reproductive system. What's one combination that really stands out for you?
Oh, number one is Venus Pluto.
Yeah.
It's Venus Pluto. You're going to see potentially things. So Venus is the uterus. We signify her with the uterus. And then Pluto is abnormal functioning, abnormal growths. So when a woman has Venus Pluto, she can have trauma to her uterus or reproductive system in general. And if we have abnormal growths, we think about things like endometriosis, where that lining isn't confined to just inside the uterus, but could be all sorts of places inside, causing things to stick together, causing ridiculous pain. It is sometimes it's one of those things where you take a look, you do a laparoscopic surgery, and you can see things and clean it off and get rid of that excess material. But for a woman to get to that point sometimes is years and years. And in the meantime, every month she's suffering. So Venus, Pluto, 100% endometriosis. So yeah, so for hysterectomy studies, that would be the potential removal because Pluto will also take things and doesn't give them back. So
Mm.
that this Pluto can also be the removal of the uterus that we can see.
If you met with somebody who is younger, say in their like 20s, 30s, and they told you, I've had irregular periods my on and off my entire life. and they have a strong Venus Pluto combination, what would you suggest to them?
I would talk to them about how painful are your periods, how heavy is your bleeding, have you talked to your OB/GYN about it? And if they're saying something like, yeah, been a couple of years and they don't really seem to care or do anything about it, be like, switch your doctor. Switch your doctor.
Yes.
I'm not an herbalist. I'm not anything else. I can't say, oh, take wolf root or something. I don't know that kind of stuff, but I'm sure
Yeah.
there's other things that are out there that can help with those things. But just even for somebody to say, look, I see there's a propensity for your menstrual cycles to be very difficult or to have these things going on. I think that just sometimes people just need to be seen. And I think astrology is one of the ways we can help people be seen.
Mhm.
And just even having that knowledge, like, I am not crazy. This is something that's real in my experience. I need help for this. And sometimes that just helps them take the extra step.
I have to chime in and say because infertility has been one of my
Okay.
specialties with acupuncture, and so if that woman came to me, I would be like, "Think about fertility preservation." But you don't have to think about exactly how to do that, but that would get her thinking about investigating resources in terms of nutrition, lifestyle, diet, well-being, all of those things, because fertility preservation is something you're gonna wanna think about with Venus Pluto, so that it's not taken away from you before you want it to be.
Mhm.
Good point.
And also that people do tend to write off menstrual cramps and things like that as just par for the course being a woman. And there's an idea in East Asian medicine that by the time we get to perimenopause, menopause, a lot of how we navigate that transition has to do with our reproductive health over the course of the last 30 years, 40 years. And so if we write off all these small symptoms as, oh my gosh, yeah, I eat a half a bottle of Advil every month, but that takes care of it, we're really doing a disservice to ourselves.
I'm fine. Dumpster fire in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So, sun, this is the last one we'll look at. Who wants to kick us off on the sun?
The sun can be used as a highlighter. So if it's in a hard aspect of the planet, it's going to highlight that planet. But I think about more like father. And as far as medical astrology goes, the sun, it's one of those things that's tough because the sun can represent the physical body itself. And for a male, that's his highlight, that's his giver of life. That's what we look at for the male's body in particular. We can also use it for women. So we can use the sun and the moon as significators of the woman's body. But with the sun and Venus, we can always say that the reproductive system's highlighted there because I've definitely seen that a lot.
Mhm.
So that's an
What
example.
about just as a general indicator for one's overall vitality or metabolism or metabolic fire? Because with somebody like Sun Neptune, I would think, yeah, they're going to be more vulnerable. They're going to come in, their energy is going to get dispersed a lot more easily. Their physical body and vitality is going to be more impacted by environment, people, the things around them. I haven't really looked at that specifically, but it makes sense that you'd be able to use the sun as an overall gauge of constitutional energy levels.
Yeah, I personally have Sun Neptune. And one thing that I've found really helpful because I've always struggled with my energy levels and that porousness. What does Michael say that your aura has holes in it? I've definitely felt that and something I've had to work through. And a lot of my clients are quite spiritual as well. And so, one thing that's really helped me that if they're open to it, I pass down to them is different ways to strengthen their energetic field and make it bigger. Because I think that when you have an energetic field that is so porous, you tend to pull in on yourself. And so that is part of that whole dynamic that happens. But if you can broaden your energy field and close that porousness on a regular basis, it helps a lot. It helps energetically, it helps in your health in general. And it doesn't fix everything, but it definitely makes you feel like you have more agency. Where with that Sun Neptune, I found that it feels as though every little thing sticks to me and tries to get in. And So always just from my own personal experience, that's something I've found to be really, really powerful. And I think that when we look at the sun too, we can look at if we see somebody who has, say, Sun Jupiter or Sun Mars, then that's somebody who's going to have a lot of energy potentially, and somebody who's able to kind of go, go, go and feel as though they can burn all 5 engines at once, and it's not till they get older, so probably like midlife until they start to really feel the impacts of that. So, when I see combinations like that in a client, I'll usually speak to them about that.
And they usually know it too. They're like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I was rocking out in my 30s and early 40s then.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So and Sarah, you have Sun Pluto. How do you experience that from a health perspective?
I do think I have a very deep mind over matter capacity to completely override my body, to
Mhm.
check out, like, I'm going to climb a mountain today, despite the fact that I haven't gotten off the couch for 6 months, and I'll just go and will myself to do it. The Pluto will just I can yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Is
do a
that
lot of learning through my body, for sure. It's been a vehicle for transformation. A lot of my lessons have come through my embodied self.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Is that something that you work with your clients with as well? When you see that, is that something that you've seen play out, being able to speak to?
I'm not sure about Sun Pluto, but listening to you both talk today, this gets a little philosophical. It just makes me think that every thing we face, every symptom is ultimately a product of us and where we find ourselves in life, in our environment, in our behaviors, in our rhythms and routines. And so, yes, people will come in and they don't really want to acknowledge that because we want to do what we want to do in life. We want to eat the pretzels. But I think healing is about breaking patterns ultimately and establishing new patterns. And so there is no rite of passage through illness where you will not have to make some changes, sacrifice something, rebuild something, create new patterns. And that's not a very Western notion. As Americans, we want to have our cake and eat it too. We think we can just add more to remedy all ills, just take a supplement, a medication. And sometimes we really need to have a good hard look at ourselves and see if our animal needs are being met in this human body, in this form. And we all have a lot of pressures on us in terms of environmental exposure and the food systems being what they are in this country and us being so much more removed and disconnected from nature. So I think astrology is a potent tool at just looking at a person, the fact that Michael starts with the soul and psyche and really spends a lot of time fleshing out the personality of a person, I think is really important because ultimately it is that aspect of self that's making the decisions,
Mhm.
which creates our lifestyle, which by the time we get to a point of being symptomatic, something we have not connected the dots and we have not met our needs in some capacity. So we will have to evaluate that stuff.
Mhm.
And you will see it in the chart, as you both know.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
This has been a great discussion. I could talk about medical astrology for another hour.
I
There's
know,
so
I
much
know.
more.
I know there's so many other things I wanna talk about. So maybe, Karen, we'll have you back on and we'll do a part 2 of medical astrology. Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us. Do you wanna let everybody know where to reach you, what you have going on, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm CarrieSmithCrawford.com, and I have a newsletter you can sign up for. I've written 3. Yeah, that's awesome. So, yeah, you can follow me on social media. I don't post a lot of stuff about astrology. I'm just kind of like, whatever. So I'm kind of random. I'm a random. Come check me out.
Are you a
I love that.
Gemini, Karen? Are you a
What's that?
Are you a Gemini? When you were talking about the curiosity, I was like, "Oh, I
I'm a
wanted to look
Sag
at your
rising.
chart."
Sag.
Oh. Mm, okay.
It's just,
There it is.
Okay.
but thank you so much, you guys, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of
It's been a
course, yeah.
pleasure.
It's been fun. Thank you, everybody. Sarah and I don't yet know what we're doing next month, so we'll be as surprised as you guys. But please join us again next month. We'll be here to talk about something fun and inspiring and interesting. And please like, subscribe, and all the things. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. As always, thanks for listening to Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans. If you're so inclined, like, follow, and subscribe, and don't be a stranger.
Signing off for now. Until next time, humans, keep your gaze upwards on the stars and be well. We look forward to sharing more soon.